If you care about real frontier history, the kind written in hunger, frost and hard decisions, stay with me. Today we're digging into what early settlers actually ate when crops failed, supply lines collapsed, and winter refused to loosen its grip. Not the romanticized version, not the tidy textbook summary. The uncomfortable, ingenious, sometimes desperate measures that kept families alive. And before we get into it, subscribe to The Prepper Historian and share this with someone who respects the hard truths of the past. This channel is about preserving knowledge that was earned the hard way, and what you'll hear today is practical, tested, and far more relevant than most people realize. Food scarcity on the frontier wasn't rare. It was cyclical. Drought, blight, early frost, insects, and delayed wagon trains could push a settlement from stability to starvation within weeks. When that happened, survival shifted from farming to foraging, from planned agriculture to improvised caloric extraction from the landscape. Early settlers borrowed heavily from indigenous knowledge, rediscovered old-world famine foods, and learned through brutal trial and error. When grain stores ran out, settlers turned first to wild starches. Calories were the priority. Protein mattered, but carbohydrates meant survival through winter. One of the most important famine foods was the humble cattail. Its rhizomes, buried in muddy shallows, are dense with starch. Settlers dug them up, washed off the mud, pounded or scraped out the fibrous material, then dried and ground it into flour. The process is labour-intensive but reliable. In a modern context, this is actionable. Locate cattails in clean water sources, harvest in late fall or early spring when starch content peaks, and process by crushing and soaking the pulp to separate fibres from starch. Let the starch settle in water, pour off the liquid and dry the sediment. You have a usable flour extender. Acorns were another cornerstone, especially in oak-rich regions. Raw acorns are bitter due to tannins, but they are calorically dense. Settlers shelled them, ground them, and leached the meal in repeated changes of water until the bitterness faded. The result could be baked into flatbread or thickened into porridge. The practical lesson here is understanding leaching. Cold water leaching preserves more starch but takes longer. In a survival context, crush the acorns into coarse meal, submerge in a cloth sack in running water, or repeatedly soak and drain until the water runs clear. Dry the meal before storage. When fresh meat disappeared, small game and overlooked protein sources became essential. Large game thinned quickly around settlements, you know. Deer populations dropped and hunting pressure increased. Settlers shifted to squirrels, rabbits, groundhogs, raccoons, and even crows. Trapping replaced open pursuit because it conserved energy. Snares made from wire or cordage were set along habitual runs. Deadfall traps required minimal materials. The takeaway for preparedness is efficiency. During scarcity, calories burned, hunting must not exceed calories gained. Passive trapping systems work while you do other tasks. Fish and shellfish sustained many frontier communities. In lean times, people harvested mussels from rivers and smoked or dried fish for storage. Even insects were not entirely off the table. Grasshoppers, when roasted, provided protein during plagues in some regions. This is uncomfortable history, but accurate. Protein density matters more than modern sensibilities. When cultivated vegetables failed, wild greens filled the nutritional gap. Scurvy and malnutrition were constant threats. Wild greens, such as lamb's quarters, dandelion, purslane and chickweed, provided critical vitamins. Lamb's quarters, in particular, was often called wild spinach and could be boiled or added to stews. Dandelion leaves and roots were both consumed, the roots roasted as a coffee substitute. The practical lesson is identification and seasonality. Learn to positively identify at least 5 wild greens in your region. Harvest young leaves for tenderness. Rotate gathering areas to avoid depletion. Tree bark and inner cambium became emergency rations. In extreme famine, settlers stripped the inner bark from pine, birch and elm. The cambium layer, just beneath the outer bark, can be dried and ground into a coarse flour. Scandinavian immigrants were familiar with bark bread from Old World famines and brought that knowledge west. This was not preferred food. It was survival food. The key is understanding the difference between edible inner bark and toxic species. Pine cambium, harvested in spring when sap flows, is the most accessible. Remove only from fallen or already doomed trees to avoid killing healthy ones. Wild fruits and preserved stores extended survival windows. Berries were dried in summer precisely for winter shortages. Elderberries, service berries and wild plums were sun-dried or smoked for later use. Settlers also relied on root cellars and hidden caches. In times of crop failure, they rationed strictly. Dried pumpkin strips, sometimes called pumpkin leather, were rehydrated in stews. Corn, when available, was nixtamalized with wood ash to increase nutrition and prevent deficiency diseases. That chemical knowledge, borrowed from indigenous practices, was life-saving. You can replicate this by soaking dried corn in a solution of water and hardwood ash, rinsing thoroughly and cooking. It increases available niacin and makes the corn more digestible. Famine forced settlers to rethink what counted as food. Many so-called weeds were tolerated during normal years, but harvested aggressively during shortages. Thistles were peeled for their tender inner stalks. Burdock roots were dug in their first year before becoming woody. Even maple seeds were boiled and eaten when little else remained. The lesson here is flexibility. Survival diets are defined by availability, not preference. Energy management was as important as food acquisition. During famine, communities reduced physical exertion, consolidated cooking, and shared labour. Women often led foraging efforts while men maintained traps and defensive readiness. Children gathered greens and kindling. Knowledge was communal. For modern preparedness, this means skill-sharing matters as much as stockpiling. One person knowing how to process acorns is useful. An entire group knowing how to do it is resilience. There is a final truth here that deserves attention. Frontier famine foods were rarely accidental discoveries. They were layered knowledge systems, combining indigenous expertise, European famine traditions, and frontier experimentation. The settlers who survived were the ones who observed closely, adapted quickly, and respected the land's hidden pantry. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Food security is not just about storage. It is about literacy in your landscape. Learn the starches, the greens, the fallback proteins and the seasonal cycles where you live. Practice processing techniques before you need them. Understand that desperation rewards preparation. If this deep dive into forgotten frontier foraging, what early settlers ate during famines added something new to your understanding, subscribe to the Prepper Historian and share this with someone serious about historical survival knowledge. These stories are more than history. They are instruction manuals written in hardship, and they remain as relevant now as they were on the edge of the frontier.